The door hadn't even closed behind him yet, and already the room had made its decision. No handshake exchanged, no sentence spoken, no idea shared. And yet in that half-second window, before his mouth even opened, 3 people in that room had already decided how much attention he deserved. That's not an exaggeration. That's biology. Somewhere in a boardroom in New York, a man walked in for the interview of his life, a position he'd spent 6 years preparing for. A resume sharper than anyone else's in the building, and he lost the job before he said a single word. Not because he lacked the answers. He had all of them. He lost it in the first 4 seconds. When the panel's eyes swept over him and quietly filed him under not quite. Nobody told him that. Nobody ever does. That's the cruelty of it. You can spend a decade building your mind and lose the room in less time than it takes to blink. This is the story of why that happens, and more importantly, how the ones who understand it turn it into the sharpest weapon they own. You'll learn why judgment arrives before conversation ever does. You'll learn the invisible mechanism that decided the fate of a broke Englishman with no title, no fortune, and no name, and somehow made him one of the most powerful men in England. You'll learn why one flaw can quietly poison every other quality you have. And you'll learn how to make yourself, finally, impossible to overlook. Drop this in the comments before we begin. I control the verdict. Let's go. Number 1. The verdict arrives before the trial. Picture a courtroom where the jury decides guilt or innocence before the defense even stands up. Sounds broken, doesn't it? Unjust, even. And yet this is exactly how human perception operates every single day, in every room you walk into. The brain is not built for patience. It was built for speed, long before contracts, long before boardrooms, long before first dates. It was built to answer one question in half a second: friend or threat, safe or dangerous, worth my attention or not. That ancient circuitry never got the memo that the world changed. It still fires the same way it did when survival depended on reading a stranger correctly before they got close enough to hurt you. Except now, instead of predators, it's reading posture. Instead of danger, it's reading grooming. Instead of threat, it's reading whether your shoulders are back or curled forward like an apology. Psychologists have a name for this thin slicing. It's the mind's ability to take an almost absurdly small amount of information and stretch it into a full verdict. A glance, a walk, a wrinkle in a shirt. That's the entire trial. And from that thin slice, an entire story gets written about who you are, whether you asked for it or not. Here's what makes it dangerous. That story isn't filed away as unconfirmed. It's filed away as fact. And once the brain believes something is fact, it stops looking for the truth. It starts looking for confirmation. So if the first slice says confident, every following action gets interpreted generously. A pause looks like composure. A mistake looks like a minor slip. But if the first slice says uncertain, the exact same pause looks like nerves. And the exact same mistake looks like proof they were right about you all along. This is why the second impression rarely gets a fair hearing. You're not correcting a blank page. You're fighting a verdict that already has momentum. Your own actions from that point forward are being twisted to support instead of examined on their own terms. 2 candidates can walk into that boardroom with identical arsems, identical intelligence, identical ambition. One stands tall, moves with intention, meets eyes like it costs nothing. The other enters half apologizing with their body before they've said a word. The panel doesn't consciously decide to favor one. Their ancient wiring already did that work in the hallway. Before the interview even started, Machiavelli wrote about this centuries before a single psychology journal existed. He understood, with brutal clarity, that most people judge with their eyes long before they judge with their reason, and that a prince who is seen to possess virtue benefits from it, whether or not he possesses the reality beneath it, because so few ever look past the surface to check. That is not permission to fake anything. It's a warning. If you have built real substance, real discipline, real skill, real character, and you let your outward presence contradict it, you are handing your enemies, your competitors, your interviewers, a false verdict for free. You are letting a 5-second glance override 6 years of work. The world does not wait for your explanation. It renders judgment and moves on. Your only real choice is whether that judgment matches what's actually true about you. Drop this in the comments. The verdict starts before I speak. Number 2. Appearance is not vanity, it's the door. There's a mistake almost everyone makes at some point, usually early in life, and it costs them more than they'll ever know. They assume the world runs on merit, that if they simply become good enough at something, recognition will follow automatically, like gravity. It doesn't work that way. Merit doesn't announce itself. It has to be discovered, and discovery requires that someone, at some point, decides you're worth a closer look. That's the part people miss. Appearance isn't a substitute for substance. It was never meant to be. What it is the door substance walks through to be noticed at all. Think of 2 employees walking into the same Monday morning meeting. One arrives with pressed clothing, clear eyes, a spine that isn't asking permission to exist. The other arrives rumpled, half a step behind, looking like the day already won. Give them, for a moment, the exact same intelligence, the exact same work ethic, the exact same ideas sitting quietly in their heads, waiting to be heard. Only one of them is going to get asked their opinion in that meeting. Not because the other doesn't deserve it, because nobody in that room has any way of measuring invisible qualities directly. They can't see your work ethic. They can't see your integrity. They can't see the 6 years of preparation behind your resume. All they have access to is what's visible, and visible signals become the only evidence available for invisible truths. This is not the world being unfair on purpose. It's the world being efficient out of necessity. People are making dozens of judgments a day about strangers they'll never have time to truly know. Appearance becomes shorthand, a fast, if imperfect, guess at what lies underneath. And here's the part worth sitting with. This isn't about becoming wealthy or chasing trends or drowning yourself in logos. Some of the most forgettable impressions in history were made by people wearing the most expensive clothing in the room. Cost was never the signal that mattered. Intention was. Clean is a signal. Fitted is a signal. Deliberate is a signal. A shirt that actually fits your shoulders says more about your discipline than a designer label ever will. Because fit requires attention, and attention is exactly what people are unconsciously measuring. There's a second, quieter benefit almost nobody talks about. When you know you look prepared, something shifts internally. Your spine straightens without being told to. Your voice steadies. You stop performing confidence and start simply having it, because the external evidence is finally lining up with how you want to feel. Appearance, it turns out, isn't only a message sent outward. It's a message you send to yourself first. The people who consistently get noticed didn't get lucky with genetics or budget. They simply stopped leaving the door closed. They understood that no matter how extraordinary the room inside the house, nobody walks through a door that looks abandoned. Drop this in the comments. I open the door myself. Number 3. The man who owned nothing and ruled a room anyway. Late 18th century England. Titles meant everything. Bloodlines decided who mattered and who didn't, who got invited and who got quietly excluded. Into that rigid, aristocratic machine walked a man with no fortune, no noble blood, and no formal power whatsoever. His name was Beau Brummel, and within a few short years, some of the most powerful men in England, including the future king himself, were studying how he dressed the way soldiers study a commanding officer. Here's what should have made that impossible. Brummel wasn't flashy. While the wealthy men around him competed in a race of gaudy embroidery, jeweled buttons, and increasingly loud colors, each trying to outshout the next in fabric, Brummel went the opposite direction entirely. Simpler cuts, cleaner lines, nothing gaudy, nothing shouting, just precision, executed with an obsession that bordered on discipline. His clothes fit his body exactly, not loosely, not for comfort, not for convenience, exactly, as if tailored by someone who understood that a half-inch of excess fabric was a half-inch of sloppiness on display. He reportedly spent hours simply achieving the correct fold of a cravat, discarding attempt after attempt until it sat with mathematical precision. To an outsider, that might look like vanity. It wasn't. It was a demonstration. Every wrinkle he refused to tolerate was a message. I notice details other people ignore. Every hour spent on a single fold of fabric said, I hold myself to a standard nobody is forcing on me. And the aristocracy men who had never once had to earn anything in their lives looked at that discipline and mistook it, correctly, for exactly the kind of self-command that commands respect in any room, in any century. Brummel had no army, no land, no inheritance. What he had was proof, worn on his body every single day, that he operated by a personal standard higher than the room required. And people cannot help but defer to a standard they sense is genuinely higher than their own. This is the lesson almost everyone skips past too quickly. It was never about the clothes. The clothes were simply the medium. What actually moved through a ballroom and commanded a prince's attention was discipline made visible, proof, worn quietly and consistently, that here stood a man who did not cut corners even when nobody was checking. That's a lesson that has nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with standards. The details other people skip are exactly the details that separate forgettable from unforgettable. Not because anyone's grading you on it consciously, because consistency in the small, unwatched things is the only evidence anyone has that you'd also be consistent in the large, important ones. Drop this in the comments. Discipline is the loudest outfit I own. Number 4. One strength, and suddenly everything looks stronger. There's a strange trick the mind plays on itself, and once you see it, you can't unsee it anywhere. It's called the halo effect, and it explains why certain people seem to receive trust they haven't technically earned yet. Their ideas get taken more seriously before they've been tested. Their mistakes get more patience than someone else's identical mistake would receive. People simply assume, often correctly and sometimes not, that they know what they're doing. Here's the mechanism underneath it. The brain hates evaluating people one quality at a time. It's slow, it's expensive, and most days there simply isn't time. So instead, it takes a shortcut. One strong, visible signal: composure, sharp presentation, controlled body language gets used as a stand-in for a dozen qualities it hasn't actually verified. Intelligence, reliability, competence, trustworthiness, all inferred from a single data point that was never meant to carry that much weight, but does anyway. Walk into a room composed, and people's brains quietly fill in the blanks in your favor before you've said a word worth judging. Walk in unprepared, and the opposite quiet math starts running against you. This is why the first 30 seconds of a presentation matter disproportionately more than they should. An audience that watches someone walk on stage looking calm and prepared starts listening generously, leaning in, giving benefit of the doubt, expecting value before a single sentence, has proven anything. The exact same words, delivered by someone who looks like they didn't want to be there, land completely differently. Not because the content changed, because the frame around it did. Machiavelli grasped this with an almost cynical precision. He understood that people are, more often than they'd admit, moved by what they see before they ever get around to verifying what's true, and the ruler who seemed capable was frequently treated as capable long before anyone checked the receipts. But here's the warning buried inside the advantage. And it matters more than the advantage itself. The halo effect opens a door. It does not build the room behind it. If someone walks in looking sharp and then delivers nothing, the illusion collapses fast, and it collapses harder than if there'd never been a strong first impression at all, because now there's a contradiction to explain. Presentation is packaging. Packaging gets you picked up off the shelf. It has never once, in the history of anything, been the reason someone stayed loyal to a product that didn't work. The two have to travel together. Build the substance first, then make sure the presentation lets people notice it exists at all. Drop this in the comments. One strong signal, and the room leans in. Number 5. One crack, and the whole wall gets blamed. Now the reverse, and this is the half of the equation almost nobody prepares for, because it's uncomfortable to admit how much a single flaw can cost. It's called the horn effect, and it's the halo effect's cruel twin. Instead of one strength lifting everything else, one visible weakness drags everything else down with it fairly or not. Someone notices a wrinkled shirt, a missed detail, grooming that looks like an afterthought, and almost instantly a quiet question starts forming that has nothing to do with the shirt itself. If they let this slide, what else might they be letting slide? If they can't manage this small, visible thing, can I really trust them with the bigger, invisible ones? That question is rarely asked out loud. It doesn't need to be. It just quietly recalibrates everything that happens afterward. The same comment that would have landed as insightful from someone polished now gets received with a flicker of skepticism. Not because the idea changed, because the lens it's being filtered through changed first. This is the part that stings the most, because it's so often carried by people who did nothing wrong except neglect something that felt unimportant. They worked hard, they built real skill, they have genuine character, and none of that gets a fair hearing, because a preventable detail got there first and colored the room before the substance ever had its turn. The fix here isn't chasing perfection that's a trap of its own, an impossible standard nobody meets every single day. The fix is closing the easy gaps, the wrinkle that could have been fixed in 10 seconds, the grooming that could have taken 5 minutes. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, because you're refusing to hand a stranger a reason to doubt you before they've even earned the right to. Think of it less as seeking praise and more as removing landmines. You're not trying to dazzle every single room you walk into. You're trying to make sure nothing in your presentation gives anyone free ammunition to underestimate what you're actually capable of. Machiavelli understood this distinction cold. A capable man with a careless presentation doesn't just risk indifference, he risks active doubt. Doubt that competence alone often isn't enough to undo once it's taken root. Every unnecessary flaw is friction. And friction, quietly, is the tax you pay on every future interaction until you fix it. Drop this in the comments. I remove the easy reasons to doubt me. Number 6. The sentence your body finishes before you speak. Long before your voice enters a room, your body has already been talking. Most people spend years sharpening what comes out of their mouth, vocabulary, argument, delivery, and almost none sharpening what their body says while they're still walking to the chair. That's a mistake, because in many rooms, the body gets believed first, and the words only get evaluated afterward, filtered through whatever verdict the body already delivered. Posture is the loudest of these signals. Someone who curls inward, shoulders forward like they're apologizing for taking up space, reads as uncertain before a single word confirms or denies it. Someone who stands upright, unhurried, occupying their space without announcing it, reads as composed, whether or not they feel composed on the inside. The body doesn't wait for permission to make that impression. It makes it automatically. Eye contact carries its own quiet verdict. Too little, and you read as evasive, distracted, unsure of your own ground. Too much, aggressive, uncomfortable to be near. The right amount steady, natural, present without staring signals something simple and powerful. I am here, fully, and I am not afraid of being seen. People extend trust faster to someone who isn't flinching from their gaze. Movement tells its own story too. Watch someone nervous closely, the fidgeting, the rushed gestures, the restlessness that leaks out even when they're trying to hide it. Now compare that to someone controlled, whose movements are deliberate, unhurried, entirely their own. Control over the body reads, fairly or not, as control over everything else, emotions, decisions, pressure, and underneath all of it sits fit and grooming, quietly reinforcing or quietly undermining every other signal. A well-fitted, clean presentation whispers, I paid attention to this, which means I probably pay attention elsewhere too. A neglected one whispers the opposite, whether that's fair or not. Here's the deeper truth buried in all of this. When your words and your body disagree, people believe the body. Every time. You can claim confidence out loud while your shoulders confess the opposite, and the room will trust the shoulders. This is why consistency between what you say and what your posture, gaze, and movement communicate isn't a nice extra, it's the entire foundation the message stands on. None of this is about performing dominance or faking a version of yourself that isn't real. It's about making sure the version of you that's already disciplined, already capable, already worth listening to actually gets to arrive in the room fully, instead of getting quietly contradicted by a slouch nobody meant anything by. Drop this in the comments. My body speaks before I do, so I make sure it tells the truth. Number 7. The standard nobody has to check on. Most people only remember to look sharp when something important is on the calendar. An interview, a first date, a big pitch. For that one day, suddenly the shirt gets ironed, the shoulders come back, the details get noticed. Then the event ends, and the old habits quietly return the very next morning. That's the difference between occasional effort and an actual standard, and it's the difference that decides who gets remembered as reliable and who gets remembered as inconsistent. The people who are consistently taken seriously, year after year, aren't relying on motivation showing up at the right moment. They've built something closer to infrastructure, small, boring, repeated habits that hold the line whether anyone's watching that day or not. Grooming maintained on a normal Tuesday, not just before the big Friday meeting. Posture checked out of habit, not panic. Clothing chosen with intention on an ordinary day, not just a special one. This is what actually separates presentable from exceptional. Presentable shows up when it's asked to. Exceptional shows up because it forgot how to do anything else. And the compounding effect of this is easy to underestimate. Every time you meet your own quiet standard on a day nobody was checking, something small reinforces itself internally, proof, collected privately, that you don't cut corners even when there's no audience to impress. That kind of private proof builds a version of self-respect that public praise can't manufacture, because you know it wasn't performed for anyone. Machiavelli's princes, who lasted, who actually held power for decades instead of months, were rarely the ones improvising in the moment. They built systems. They built routines that ran whether they felt inspired that day or not. because they understood that opportunity rarely announces itself in advance, and the reward almost always goes to whoever was already prepared, not whoever started preparing the moment the door opened. That's the real meaning behind an obsession with appearance, stripped of the vanity people assume is hiding underneath it. It was never about being admired. It's about refusing to let an ordinary Tuesday catch you unprepared for the Wednesday that actually mattered. Drop this in the comments. Excellence is my baseline, not my exception. None of this replaces substance. Say it plainly, because it deserves to be said plainly. A sharp appearance cannot manufacture competence that isn't there. Good grooming cannot replace real knowledge. Presence alone cannot replace character. If there's nothing underneath the door, opening it just reveals an empty room faster. But here is the truth this entire video has been circling. The world does not wait to discover who you really are before it decides how much attention you're worth. It decides first, quietly, in seconds, based on what it can actually see, and only later, if you're lucky, does it go back and check whether the verdict was fair. Machiavelli understood that perception moves first and truth follows behind, often too late to matter. That's not an invitation to become fake. It's a warning against staying invisible. Build the substance completely, without shortcuts. Then refuse to let a careless detail stand between that substance and the people who need to see it. Most people spend their entire lives hoping someone eventually notices what they're truly capable of. A much smaller number stop waiting and simply make themselves impossible to miss. If this landed, hit like it helps this reach someone who's underestimating exactly how much this decides for them. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more on power, psychology, and self-mastery. One last thing before you go. Drop this in the comments. I am impossible to overlook.